Yamuna Tiravana Chari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Gopi Janabala Girid Baradari. Jai Gopi Janabal Laba Girid Baradari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Gopi Janaballabha Girid Baradari. Jai Gopi Janaballabha Girid Baradari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Shabam Zabadara Jikataya Stote Satasi Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Shabam Zabadara Jikataya Stote Satasi Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada Ki Go Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, Chapter 21, Instructions by Maharaja Prthu, Text 12. Sarvastras kalita desha sapta dvipaika dandadrik anyatra brahmana kulad anyatrach chuta gotrataha sarvatras kalita desha sapta dvipaika dandadrik anyatra brahmana kulad anyatrach yuta gotrataha sarvatras kalita desha sapta dvipaika dandadrik anyatra brahmana kulad anyatrach yuta gotrataha Damodar Prabhu, you want to chant? Vaishnavis. Sarvatra, everywhere. Askalita, irrevocable. Adesha, order. Saptadvipa, 7 islands. Eka, 1. Dandadrik, the ruler who holds the scepter. Anyatra, except. Brahmana kulat, brahmanas and saintly persons. Anyatra, except. Achyuta gotrata, descendants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vaishnavas. Translation. Maharaja Prthu was an unrivaled king and possessed the scepter for ruling all the 7 islands on the surface of the globe. No one could disobey his irrevocable orders, but the saintly persons, the brahmanas, and the descendants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Vaishnavas. Purport. Saptadvipa refers to the 7 great islands or continents on the surface of the globe: Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, Australia, and Oceania, New Zealand. In the modern age, people are under the impression that during the Vedic period or the prehistoric ages, America and many other parts of the world had not been discovered. But that is not a fact. Prthu Maharaj ruled over the world many thousands of years before the so-called prehistoric age. And it is clearly mentioned here that in those days, not only were all the different parts of the world known, but they were ruled by one king, Maharaja Prthu. The country where Prthu Maharaja resided must have been India, because it is stated in the 11th verse of this chapter that he lived in the tract of land between the rivers Ganges and Yamuna. This tract of land, which is called Brahmavarta, consists of what is known in the modern age as portions of Punjab and northern India. It is clear that the kings of India once ruled all the world and that their culture was Vedic. The word askalita indicates that orders by the king could not be disobeyed by anyone in the entire world. Such orders, however, were never issued to control saintly persons or the descendants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. The Supreme Lord is known as Achyuta, and Lord Krishna is addressed as such by Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. Senayor madhye latam stapaya mechyuta. Achyuta refers to one who does not fall because he is never influenced by the modes of material nature. When a living entity falls down to the material world from his original position, he becomes Chuta, which means that he forgets his relationship with Achyuta. Actually, every living entity is part and parcel, or a son of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When influenced by the modes of material nature, a living entity forgets this relationship and thinks in terms of different species of life. But when he again comes to his original consciousness, he does not observe such bodily designations. This is indicated in Bhagavad Gita by the words, Pandita Samadarshanaha. Material designations create differentiation in terms of caste, color, creed, nationality, and so forth. Different gotras, or family designations, are distinctions in terms of the material body. But when one comes to Krishna consciousness, he immediately becomes one of the Achyuta Gotra, or descendants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus becomes transcendental to all considerations of caste, creed, color, and nationality. Maharaja Prthu had no control over the Brahmanakula, which refers to the learned scholars in Vedic knowledge, nor over the Vaishnavas, who are above the considerations of Vedic knowledge. It is therefore said, Arche Vishnu Shila Dir Gurushu Naramatir Vaishnave Jati Budhir Vishnurva Vaishnavanam Kalimala Matane Padatirtembu Buddhi Sri Vishnu Namni Mantre Sakala Kalusha He Shabda Samanya Buddhir Vishnu Sarveshvareshe Tad Itara Samadhir Yasyava Nadaki Saha. One who thinks the deity in the temple to be made of wood or stone, who thinks of the spiritual master in the disciplic succession as an ordinary man, who thinks the Vaishnava in the Achyuta Gotra to belong to a certain caste or creed, or who thinks of Charanamrita or Ganges water as ordinary water, is taken to be a resident of hell. Padma Purana. From the facts presented in this verse, it appears that people in general should be controlled by a king until they come to the platform of Vaishnavas and Brahmanas, who are not under the control of anyone. Brahmana refers to one who knows Brahman, or the impersonal feature of the absolute truth. And a Vaishnava is one who serves the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Translation again. Maharaja Prthu was an unrivaled king and possessed the scepter for ruling all the 7 islands on the surface of the globe. No one could disobey his irrevocable orders, but the saintly persons, the Brahmanas, and the descendants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Vaishnavas. Om Ganatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militang Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Someone may think, how is it possible for one person to rule over the world, the whole world? We project from our current Kali Yuga experience. Or we think we're very learned and educated when we can refer to maybe a few hundred years of Kali Yuga experience. And then we look at the Srimad Bhagavatam through those lenses. How can one person be so powerful? But just turn the lens around and look the other way. Persons in the time of Prthu Maharaj would look at living entities, human beings today, and wonder, how can persons be so dumb and fallen? So everything depends on your perspective. You take the Kali Yuga standpoint to be so dominant and defining, definitive, whereas from the viewpoint of rishis like Vidura and Maitreya, Kali Yuga is such an exceptional abomination. So we think, this must be some kind of myth. How can one person rule the whole world? These days, one person can't even rule a whole town. Sometimes in the news you see, like on the South Island, in some tiny town of 2,000, I think Gore or something like that. Not G-A-U-R, but G-O-R-E, but still they get benefit living in a town named Gore. So there they elected a mayor who's 21 years old. And now he was in a bit of trouble because they say he's arrogant, he doesn't listen to anyone. So people think, you just see a little town of 2,000 persons, or a little New Zealand with close to 5 million persons. One person can't rule that. Well, look at the USA. So much political division. And here you're telling us that your Prthu Maharaj ruled the whole world. That's got to be mythology. I was reading one interesting quotation I saved from Srila Prabhupada. It's from somewhere in Bhagavatam purport. That he says, it is the person who rules, not the impersonal government. So people like to always say, the government, or the conspiracy, or this, or that, or the other. But there's always someone behind something, or someone's behind something. So Bhagavatam comes straight out and says, this is the reign of Prthu Maharaj. And because of his extraordinary qualities, he's actually, as you know, a Shaktiyavesh avatar, a living entity with special powers, special Shakti invested in him, so that he can demonstrate the example of an ideal king. In this same quotation, by Prabhupada, he points out another interesting fact. I like these sociological and political science implications. He says that only a person free from defects can rule the whole world. Otherwise, it's not possible for a chief executive to know what to do in every time, every place, every circumstance. As a conditioned soul, you can't do that. Or as someone who doesn't take advice from unconditioned, non-conditioned souls, you can't do it. You don't have knowledge or awareness of what goes on in every corner of the world due to your imperfect senses and your tendency to make mistakes. But if you take guidance from the infallible, then you certainly can function. And of course, Prthu was no ordinary person. Therefore, he could demonstrate global sovereignty because he was not ruling with imperfect senses. So you might say, well, let's be practical. Where is such a person? But again, Prthu is demonstrating that even though he is what he is, he's a Shaktyavesh avatar, he takes advice from the Brahmanas and Vaishnavas and refuses to order them around. When he enters his city, the citizens give him such a reception. You'll see at the beginning of this chapter. But Prthu Maharaj doesn't suffer from the slightest pride in spite of such a glorious reception. Vidura wants to hear more about Prthu from Maitreya Rishi. Vidura hasn't heard enough. I wish to hear more and more about Prthu Maharaj because his activities are so pious and auspicious. So what is this about Prthu Maharaj being pious? And in the preceding verse, it says, it appeared that he was enjoying his destined fortune in order to diminish the results of his past pious activities. So there are two things here, prarabdha karma and apararabdha karma. In this lifetime, you get your bija, the seed of karmic reactions, sprouting, manifesting as prarabdha karma. But there's still apararabdha karma that refers, the acharyas explained, to what you're going to experience in your next life. So it's not just in this life that you're coping with all your karma, but there's also the apararabdha karma, which will hit you in your next life, and you're carrying that around with you now. So if you say that Prthu was pious, and it appeared that he was enjoying his destined fortune in order to diminish the results of his past pious activities, yes, it appeared that way, but such an elevated soul as Prthu Maharaj is not undergoing the reactions of karma, whether good or bad. So in the purport, we hear that sometimes people consider such an extraordinary devotee to be an ordinary person. And this purport warns against that. Prthu Maharaj's opulence and his living in such opulent circumstances is not the result of karma. What about the devotees we have now? Lord Brahma says, Karmani nidahati kinchucha bhakti bhajam govindam adi purusham tamahamajami. That they don't exactly get karmic reactions. Anyone who fully takes to bhakti, following the instructions, the sadhana, they don't get what is exactly karma, the reactions to their past reactions. they get a special blend given by Krishna, which is reduced. And how does that reduction look like? The example Prabhupada would always give is that electric fan is turning, you pull out the plug, cut the power off. That means officially the fan has stopped. You would say from a casual presentation, the power's off. But because the fan still has a little momentum, it's turning a little bit. But it will eventually completely stop. So similarly, a practicing devotee, a sadhaka, is not getting the full dose of karmic reactions that are due. The plug is pulled out. As long as that devotee is practicing properly, the plug is out. The blades are still turning, but that turning of the blades is nothing compared to what the blades would be doing when the power is switched on. So this is Krishna's promise in Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dhamman Prityaja Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. Just take up the ultimate dharma. Always think of me, become my devotee. I'll take care of your karmic reactions. Don't worry. You know, down under, people always like to say, no worries, mate. But Krishna is the only one who can truly say that. Because karma is a worry. For an intelligent person, he or she is concerned about karma. I've done so many things that I can remember. What to speak of what I can't remember. An intelligent person thinks like that. Just like Prthu Maharaj, he's going to instruct his citizens. And he's going to ask them, please follow Varnashram Dharma, your occupational duties, and offer the results to Krishna. Karma Mishra Bhakti, bhakti mixed with karma, karmic activities, activities for fruitive results, but you're using your occupational propensities to offer something to Krishna. Do that. And it's my duty as your chief executive to make sure you're following your occupational duties and to give you protection. If you do this, I'll get credit. I'll get blessings for being a leader who is properly benefiting his citizens. So he's asking for reciprocation. He's revealing the dependency, the interrelationship of dependency between the chief executive and his subjects. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, you would expect you would expect the people to say to Prthu, you're the king, just order us, that's all. Leave it at that. But the Prthu is saying, you play a major role in my future. If you will follow my instructions, I'll be benefited and you'll be benefited. So in making his speech, still even today, politicians like to make speech. Some are good at it, some aren't. There was one recent president of the USA, and he was considered a once-in-a-lifetime orator. He could just talk, he could sweet talk anything, anyway. So Prthu also was a speaker, but his words were all solidly immersed in Vedic wisdom. He spoke eloquently, using literary ornaments. He spoke with complete realization. And in that delivery of his speech, he said, I'm first of all addressing the devotees in the audience. He knew that there were some atheists in the audience, but he's not concerned with directly addressing them. First of all, to the devotees. And he said, any learned person would first present his conclusions for the approval of the devotees. In other words, Prthu Maharaj considered himself dependent on the wisdom and blessings of the Vaishnavas. Let me present my conclusions and you give me feedback. So as Prabhupada would always point out, saintly kings, Rajarshis like Prthu, were not dictators in the modern sense. They relied on advice from their Brahmanas, the Brahmana Vaishnavas. Now it's interesting that in this purport, you see a distinction. Brahmana refers to one who knows Brahman, or the impersonal feature of the absolute truth, and a Vaishnava is one who serves the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, during the time of Prthu, not everyone was a Brahmana Vaishnava. Still, these Brahmanas attached to the impersonal realization, they had wisdom. So Prthu is aiming especially for the devotees, and he says that. And then he appeals to the people. If you follow what I say, you'll be benefited. I'll be benefited. In my next life, I'll get benefit because I've done my proper duty as chief executive. So this is Prthu Maharaj demonstrating that a truly intelligent person is concerned about the quality of the next life. How many people do you know today who have that concern? No, everything today is about enjoying the moment. The pressure is on you to have a good time now. And at best, to set yourself up so that you can have a reasonably good time when you're in your 60s and 70s. And after that, the universe will take care of you. Who knows what will happen? But what we do know is, right now you have to please your senses. This is the dynamic of Western so-called civilization. Prthu wants his people to get relief from the wheel of samsara, the samsara chakra. They can get partial relief by just following their varnashrama duties, but he's saying, do your varnashrama duties and think of Krishna. Do karma mishra bhakti, offer the results of your activities. That you're attached to acting a certain way, but offer the results to Krishna. Why would he want something more than just a better next life for him and for his people? Prthu Maharaj, being a Vaishnava, understands the whole scheme of existence. And this is another point that's missing today. Not only do people not care about the next life, they don't even think about it, but they don't understand the whole picture of existence in the cosmos. No conception. There's a beautiful example given in Sri Caitanya Charitamrita about what was called in medieval times the dunking stool. Anyone know what that is? Raise your hands. Very few. In medieval times, and evidently it went on in India also, besides medieval Europe, because that's why the example's there in Caitanya Charitamrita. When someone's supposedly a criminal, the chief executive puts him in an apparatus, which is a chair attached to a long log by the bank of the river. And the criminal or the offender is strapped into the chair, and then the chair is lowered into the river. And just when the poor victim feels like he's dead, then he's lifted up. And then the same thing repeats. So just think of material existence in that way. You're in the chair, but you're out of the water. You're thinking, I'm set up. This is a good arrangement. And then into the water you go. And you're thinking, this is horrible. This is horrible. Raise me up. Raise me up. So the Acharyas give this example to show, number one, we're not independent. Just because you're raised out of the water in the chair momentarily, think, oh, I'm free. I've got options. I've got independence. You don't see the whole system. You don't understand the whole scheme. You may have made it to the heavenly planets, the equivalent of being in the chair out of the water. But then what's going to happen? The chair plunges into the water again. And you think, oh, this is a horrible arrangement. So this is example given in Caitanya Charitamrita to demonstrate the wheel of karma and the whole picture of existence. We're so quick to think, I'm autonomous, I'm self-defining. Just see, the chair is out of the water. I'm free, I am independent. I've heard myself, Prabhupada, give an example of what it's like in your illusory sense of independence as the chair is out of the water. He was singing, I am independent, I am independent, I am independent. He actually sang the song. And then what happens? Down into the water you go again. So when you're out of the water, heavenly planets, oh, freedom, I've got options. Let me breathe deeply, life is good. Into the water again. Oh, this is horrible. Even today, the same technique is used in a more simple way. It's called waterboarding. Anyone know what waterboarding is? There's a big controversy because the good old USA was doing it too. What you do is you take the captured prisoner of war and you put him on a board that's inclined with the head down. And then you cover the prisoner's nose and mouth with a cloth, and then you take a container of water and pour the water on the cloth. And its sensation is just like you're drowning. It's such a severe, it sounds like, well, what's the big deal? You're just laying on a board with your head down, and someone puts a cloth over your nose and mouth, and they pour water on the cloth. Seems pretty, it doesn't seem so bad, but oh, the sensation, what the person's going through is horrible. Because, as I said, the whole experience exactly resembles if you're drowning underwater. And then they stop pouring the water on, they take the cloth off, and you think, I'm safe. And then they put the cloth on, put you down, and pour water again. This goes on and on. Tell us all the information. Who are the terrorists? Tell us. We are the good guys. Tell us who are the terrorists. So the same principle goes on, whether the dunking stool of the medieval times or what's described in Caitanya Charitamrita or the waterboarding technique of today. So just put yourself in that example and see how you would feel once you're relieved of the torture. Oh, thank God. Oh, happy days are here. But you know, right? In a few moments, down you go again. This is what Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita. Chine punye marcha lokam pashanti. You go up to the heavenly planets, you think you're enjoying, but after a while, down you go into the lower planets. So Krishna is telling you, this is no way to live. Get off of this samsara chakra. And that's what Prithu's instructions are aimed at. He wants to benefit the people in the best way. So he's speaking to them in such a way that they'll be elevated. And he's asking for their cooperation. If you cooperate with my instructions, you'll benefit me, and you'll also be benefited. Now, it's interesting that during Gaura Leela, Caitanya Mahaprabhu went through so many maneuvers not to have anything to do with the king. Because Caitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna, not only distributing Krishna Prem, not only demonstrating love of Christian separation, but he is demonstrating the behavior of a sannyasi to the ultimate degree. Super strict. His followers, they didn't like it. You're the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Why do you have to follow the sannyas dharma so strictly? I remember once some devotees were presenting to Srila Prabhupada what to do about devotees who had fallen. And they gave the example. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Chota Haridas banned him from his association for the slightest apparent offense. The slightest. Just a thought Chota Haridas evidently had. And so devotees asked Prabhupada, so should we do the same? And look what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the standard, the gold standard, not simply the golden avatar, but the gold standard of behavior. Look what he did. He banished Chota Haridas just for a mental infraction. So should we treat devotees like that? What was Prabhupada's answer? I'm not Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I need all the help I can get. So as Gauranga, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, would not associate with a king, Prataparuja appealed and pleaded with the followers of Gauranga, please arrange a darshan. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, the wisest scholar in India, warned the king. Mahaprabhu doesn't see kings even in dreams, what to speak of in the flesh. The followers kept appealing to Lord Chaitanya. This king is such a great devotee. We wish we had a pinch of his devotion. And what was Mahaprabhu's answer? All that may be true, but there's one thing wrong that spoils the whole situation. The word king. Even Prataparuja gave the ultimatum that unless I get the darshan of Gauranga, I'm going to give up my post as chief executive and become a beggar door to door. So the devotees thought that was very severe. Just see who was appealing to Lord Chaitanya on behalf of the king. You had Ramananda Roy. He explained to Lord Chaitanya, you ordered me to retire from government service as one of the staff of Maharaja Prthu. You ordered me to retire and come to Puri. I presented that to the king, Prataparuja. He immediately let me go, gave me his blessings, go join Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and keep your full salary. Can you imagine you're working for some corporation or business today or for the government and you say, I'd like to do full-time devotional service for Sri Sri Radha Girihari. What do you think the Human Resources Department will say? But Prataparuja told Ramananda Roy, not only please go, you have my blessings, but continue having a full salary. So Ramananda Roy presented this to Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri. Listen to what this king does. Listen to how he's treated me. He's given me the devotee care package. And that impressed Mahaprabhu. But what was Mahaprabhu's response? Yes, all that is well and good. Yes, you're saying you, Ramananda Roy, don't have a pinch of devotion that the king has? I mean, who is Ramananda Roy? A very confidential associate of Mahaprabhu. But Lord Chaitanya said, still, king, can't do it. Mahaprabhu explained that kings are always absorbed in political affairs and sense gratification. I can't do it. The public will laugh. They won't perceive this properly. So this went on and on and on. Not only did Ramananda Roy recommend Prataparuja Maharaj to Gauranga, but Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya had already done it. Even Nityananda made a presentation. See, what happened was the devotees all made a plan. The king said he's going to give up his post and become a beggar in the street. We can't lose, as a chief executive, such a devotee king. He's such a bhakta. It'll be a tragedy if he gives up his post. So they all made a plan. We'll go before Caitanya Mahaprabhu, and we won't ask him to see the king. We'll simply go before him and describe the good qualities of the king. And from that, everything should happen. So they went before Mahaprabhu, but they couldn't say anything. They were just quiet. Mahaprabhu said, please, speak. Say what's on your mind. If I accept it, I accept it. If I don't, I don't. It was Nityananda who stepped into the breach, who stepped into the situation and said, look, the situation is this. Unless the king sees you, unless he gets your darshan, he's going to give up his post and become a beggar. So these are all the extraordinary, inconceivable personalities pleading on behalf of the king. So the devotees, as you know, hatched a plot that would happen during Ratha Yatra. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya instructed Prataparuja that during the Ratha Yatra parade, there'll be a time when the cart stops at a particular garden, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will rest in that garden, and then you, disguised as a Vaishnava, drop your king's dress, and as a Vaishnava, you approach the Lord while he's reclining, laying down in ecstasy, and you start reciting verses from the Gopi Gita section of the 10th canto. But even before that happened, during the Ratha Yatra parade itself, before the parade stopped for a break, Lord Chaitanya was lost in ecstasy, dancing. And Nityananda, who's usually near him to make sure that he doesn't crash to the ground and without being attended to, Nityananda was nowhere to be found. And Mahaprabhu is lost in ecstasy, and he collapses on the ground at the feet of the king. So what did the king do? What would you do? The king scooped him up. And then Lord Chaitanya looked at, oh, disaster. Oh, it doesn't get any worse than this. I have been touched by the king, a sense enjoyer, politician. Prataparuja was horrified. Oh no, now I'm even worse than before. My situation is even worse than before. I've made such an offense. But then Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and the other devotees said, no, don't worry. Mahaprabhu is just setting the example. Inwardly, he's pleased with you, but externally, he's showing the most rigid example of a sannyasi to instruct the people in general. So that was before the break in the Ratha Yatra, when Mahaprabhu would rest in the garden. So even before that, Prataparuja had his chance. Lord Chaitanya didn't let on that I know I'm falling at the feet on the ground right in front of the king. He didn't let on that he knew that. But the followers of Mahaprabhu assured the king, you got the mercy. But for the sake of instructing others, Mahaprabhu is showing the hard line. All this happened, well, what triggered all this flow of mercy? And it's hard for us to understand the significance of this. Not only was it because of the recommendations of the devotees, the service Prataparuja did for the devotees, the service he did for Gauranga by arranging his quarters in Jagannath Puri at the home of Kashi Mishra, what brought all that to a head was when Prataparudra, at the start of the Rath Yatra ceremony, swept the ground in front of the Rath carts. So you might say, what's the big deal? I remember, I think once in Sydney, there was a Rath Yatra, and I was given a wooden broom with gold paint on it, the contemporary equivalent of the jeweled golden broom that Prataparudra had. And so, yes, I swept the street in Sydney in front of the Rath carts. And, of course, no one thought it's any big deal. But if you understand real culture, the fact that someone so extraordinary as the king takes up such a menial role, a street sweeper. A street sweeper is not considered to be a disastrous social role in the Western world. They even give different names for street sweepers. I remember as a kid in New York City, we would call them garbage men. Now it's location maintainer. Or, even better, sanitation engineer. No stigma attached. But from the viewpoint of the culture during the time of Mahaprabhu, and even now in India, to sweep the street, there's so many filthy things in the street, unmentionable filthy things on the street, and you're the king, so elevated, and here you are sweeping the ground. So that so much impressed Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. I think many of us just pass by this and don't appreciate the impact of what Prataparudra did. But Mahaprabhu took complete notice. The most elevated person in this society, in this human society, has taken up the most menial role. And so Mahaprabhu noticed that, and therefore that was the final trigger for releasing the mercy of Mahaprabhu. So remember, Ramananda Roy had made his appeal. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya had made his appeal. Nityananda had made his appeal. The one who intervened with Jagai and Madai. Apparently, nothing worked. Even they were appealing to Mahaprabhu, and he even threatened, okay, I'm out of here. I'll just leave. I'm tired of all these requests. I'm tired of the pressure. But Prataparudra got his mercy. And after the disappearance of Mahaprabhu from this world, Prataparudra was so overwhelmed by separation that at that time he left his post after Lord Chaitanya disappeared. So here you're learning about Prthu Maharaj, and you notice his deep humility. He was not proud, although getting such opulent treatment from the citizens, and he expressed his dependency, the interrelationship. I remember another saying of Srila Prabhupada. Some or other talking about Prthu Maharaj brings a lot of these memories of Srila Prabhupada to my mind. Because I used to file all Prabhupada's letters to him and from him. And I remember him explaining that good leadership depends on good followers. How can you be a good leader if you don't have good followers? So he's emphasizing the dependency, the same interrelationship that we hear about in these verses we're studying today. Prthu is saying, I can only do my job if you cooperate, if you listen to my instructions, and then you'll be benefited and I'll be benefited. Otherwise, if I just collect taxes and don't train you, I'm going to suffer, and you'll suffer too. So remember how we started off discussing that it is the person that rules, not the impersonal government. Behind everything is always a person. You may not be able to see it. You may not be able to see the person or the persons, but there's always personhood behind everything. And if you want world unity, if you want global civilization with peace and harmony, then that means you want someone who acts according to wisdom that's beyond the imperfect senses. And that's what King Prthu can deliver. All right, any questions? Yes. How do we, the last part, how? Well, his bhakti was so extraordinary. Look and see the associates of Mahaprabhu recommending him to Mahaprabhu. Our bhakti is nothing compared to his. So Mahaprabhu is the super soul. He understands the motivation of Prataparudra. It's just that Mahaprabhu was taking the hard line about the external sannyas dharma. So he understood the heart of Prataparudra Maharaj. And therefore he was so impacted by the pure devotion of Prataparudra Maharaj, which is different from someone just acting ceremoniously. Okay, I'll come to the Radha Giridhari temple, and there are lots of Indian people there. And when the election comes, they'll vote for me. Just like that photo that went all over India of Sankarsam giving a Bhagavad Gita to the former prime minister. That's as close as she would come to Bhagavad Gita. She said that, I gave up on religion when I was 21. But some other, she took the Bhagavad Gita in her hand and someone snapped a photo and it went all over India. So she gets some credit for unconscious devotional activity. She was just doing politics. Let's get that Indian vote. There's so many of them in South Auckland. The Labor Party needs their vote. We're open to anyone and everything, multicultural. But she still gets some credit. Just like while running for president of the USA for that office, you say standing for that office here. While standing for that office, one former president embraced His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj. He doesn't understand the full impact, but he doesn't understand the full situation, but still he embraced a Vaishnav. So politicians, even though they have their own material motivations, somehow or other, if they interact with the devotee in a beneficial way, they do benefit. Without a doubt. There was one example of that that's just slipped my mind, but the principle I've already explained. Anything? Yes. But the technology has to be programmed, like with ChatGPT. It depends on what you ask it. I remember I put some, let's see if you understand this, some text that was not formatted with Sanskrit diacritics. And ChatGPT didn't know what to do with it. And then I put in text in which, that same text in which was formatted properly with the Sanskrit diacritics. And the next time I put in an unformatted text, ChatGPT got it. It spat out, the perfect text with all the diacritics in place. So I asked our Chandidas, who's IT whiz, a PhD in IT and all that. I asked him, what happened? He said, that's how quick the machine learns. But still, there's a person behind it. So many people think, oh, this technology is going to do anything. But it all depends on what you feed the machine. Ultimately, you're going to find a person somewhere. So I was speaking about politicians benefiting. I remember seeing a photo of the present Prime Minister of India, Modi. He was visiting Korea. And so the devotees, they're 99.9% of Indian background, but there's one Korean devotee. So they brought the Korean devotee along to present a Bhagavad Gita to Prime Minister Modi. And I saw the photo. Modi was like looking at this Korean devotee like, my God. He's a politician, but he couldn't disguise it. Like bhakti is possible everywhere. He was like, a devotee in Korea? The country of, well, in India you consider Korea a dog-eating country. Devotee from Korea, dressed in Vaishnava attire, tilak, shaved head, handing me a Bhagavad Gita? My goodness, what is this ISKCON doing? So it was an unforgettable moment. Anything else? Yes. What is what? Well, this is why Vidura says, tell me more, tell me more. Those who are fortunate will be inspired by hearing. They won't consider it mythology. They'll consider this is the gold standard. Just by hearing the proper standard, you become uplifted. You don't settle for less. Or at least you know what the standard is, and that's a great step forward. Otherwise, you'll just take the current caliber of political leaders as the all in all. Well, that's the way it is. There's never been anything better than this, which is not true. If you want to go deeper into the controversy, you find that Bhagavatam is contesting even your version of human history, saying that even before Prthu Maharaj, even before what you call prehistoric times, there was Prthu Maharaj ruling the whole world. So the Bhagavatam is a paradigm challenger. If you let it enter into your consciousness, you'll never be the same. Yes. Well, you could look at it in a transcendental way that if you weren't doing anything, there'd be no problem. If you were not exerting yourself to spread bhakti, then there'd be no need of a reaction. At the same time, that's not an excuse for us to take advantage of. I remember in the early days, back in the early 70s, devotees Mangal Arti would end at 5 a.m. and devotees would, especially if it was during the summer and it's hot in New York City, they would spill out onto the streets in the neighborhood. Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Ram, Hare Ram, 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 Ram. And the neighbors would complain, and the devotees would say, just see the potency. Even the non-devotees, they're disturbed. That shows that the chanting has potency. No, it just shows that you should show some discretion and proper behavior by not making such noise at 5 a.m. in the morning. But we used to think like that in the early days. especially when it came time for flowers for the deities. You knew exactly what to do. Ransack the whole neighborhood. Everything belongs to Krishna. So that's true, but such behavior endangers the preaching. And so we have to realize we're in the material world, and we should consider how the preaching can be protected. So there are two sides, in other words. It's not automatic that we made a loud noise at 5 a.m. in the morning in the neighborhood. The test of the potency is the neighbors are disturbed. And they wouldn't be disturbed unless our japa was potent. There are two sides to that. You have to use your intelligence and not go out of your way to create disturbances, but actually, you reminded me, in one of the purports we're just reading, it's pointed out that even Prthu had enemies. The purport says that for an extraordinarily powerful person as Prthu, there will be enemies. But Prthu was not addressing them. He was ignoring the atheists in the audience and said, all you devotees out there, all the devatas, demigods, the rishis, this is for you. I first place my conclusions before you for your deliberation. But he had enemies. That doesn't mean you go out of your way to create enemies. You have to use some intelligence. Still, the way this material world works, there'll be some pushback, shall we call it. In other words, if you understand how the illusory energy works, you know that it is not the function of the illusory energy to let you spread bhakti with no impediment. There'll be resistance because that's the purpose of, that's why the illusory energy exists. Whether as an individual you want to be a bhakta, there'll be some resistance. And as a society, within a society, you want to spread bhakti, some people will come forward and help you amazingly, others will try to impede you. That is the thankless task of Maya, but we don't make blunders and then say, well, it was just Maya resisting. So we require some maturity and wisdom. Just like I'm sure you're getting from the devotee care course. How many of you are attending the course? Raise your hands. Very good. In the old days, in the early 70s, if a devotee would get sick, what would we say? Don't worry about it, you're not the body. Just lay upstairs in the ashram in your sleeping bag until you get well. But now we understand that caring for a devotee is so important, and we're learning the ways how to do that. Yes. Some of us may be quite what? Yes. It's up to the purity of the devotees. I used to have a letter from Prabhupada pasted to the door of my locker in the Brahmacharya ashram. He said, all my life I've never thought small. It is my dream one day to take over the government of the USA and make it Krishna conscious. But he said, I know such plans will never happen unless there's purity. But he said, I'm sure Lord Caitanya will send me the right persons to spread the mission of Mahaprabhu. If not you, somebody else. Yes. Yes. Well, Prithu Maharaj is saying it best, that his success as a chief executive depends on the citizens carrying out his instructions. And then the citizens benefit and he benefits. So he's expressing his dependency. If I'm going to be a good leader, there have to be good followers. So I was quoting from Srila Prabhupada to show that the same point, that you might think, we just want good leaders, but where are the good followers? That was the point. Any way you can, please do it. Attract them, train them, find them if they're already qualified followers. That's Mahaprabhu's order. Wherever you go, whomever you meet, teach the science of Krishna. Teaching the science of Krishna includes how to be a good leader and how to be a good follower. But we're so leader focused. What about this leader? What about that leader? What about good followers? Where are they? Well, that doesn't matter. Where are the good leaders? This leader, this leader, that. But Prabhupada he pushed back and said, well, what about the followers? How can anyone lead unless they have properly trained followers? It's not possible. So that's the political situation throughout the world today. The followers are unqualified and the leaders are unqualified. Because the followers are unqualified, they elect in a democracy unqualified leaders. And together they all make a mess. Also in this section about Prithu Maharaj, it's explained that you can have a democracy or a monarchy. Doesn't really matter, but whoever's in charge has to know what they're doing. Because more important than the form of the government is the person or persons behind the situation who are in charge of the situation. So that's a very, that statement causes a lot of thought. Whether you have the monarchy, we're not opposed out of hand to monarchies. We're not opposed to democracy. Who is in charge? That's the point. What are their qualifications? Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Glories.